It's
Thank
recording.
you. So first of all, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. It's afternoon in Asia right now. It's morning, early morning for us here in Amsterdam. It's some of you I've known for quite some time, and we worked together on many similar issues in this sector previously. For many of you, we welcome you as new friends to the World Benchmarking Alliance. It's rather a strange world we are in right now, as you know. We're using digital technology to stay connected, to keep functioning, to keep working. And upon reflection, that's actually quite a privilege. We have the privilege of being able to do this. It's quite a rare privilege because many people all over the world still are left behind. They do not have access to technology, especially in Asia, where there are also large numbers of people who do not have access to digital technologies, do not have access to even basic connectivity services. So it's a privilege we reflect on, and what which leads to the purpose of why we are here together this morning, and the purpose of our discussion and dialogue on how digital inclusion can actually drive economic competitiveness and digital development in Asia and beyond. We have a number of participants from all over Asia, which is really exciting. We have a lot from the Philippines, we have from China, Singapore, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. If there's any other country I've forgotten, please. Oh, and Fiji, also from the Pacific. So there you go. So we are well represented in Asia. We have from Japan, of course. So it's there is something that unites us together in Asia, I would say. And I've noticed in my work, we have this drive to catch up with the rest of the world. We've seen the rest of the world develop. We've become left behind. We've started thinking of using technology and actually using it, not just thinking of technology as the driver behind our growth, behind our development. And that has resulted and that has borne fruit. And we've seen that Asia has become, has seen the birth of many technologies and many technology companies. But this renaissance, as we call it, is also concentrated in pockets and in certain countries. And it's not really as wide and broad as we would want to see it, so that all Asians in the Asian region share in the benefits of the digital economy. So without further ado, that leads us to our work in the World Benchmarking Alliance. Maybe just a bit of a background. The World Benchmarking Alliance is a global initiative founded in 2018 during the UN General Assembly. It was co-founded by the UN Foundation, Aviva Foundation, and a Dutch NGO called Index Initiative. And the purpose and mission is really to incentivize, to motivate, to drive more corporate contribution, participation, and effort towards achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. There's a lot of talk around what the corporate sector can do with SDGs. It's still uneven. Many businesses still think that SDGs are not particularly relevant to what they are doing. Some are more advanced in that they have now incorporated it into their operations, thinking about their impact on SDGs. In the digital, in the digital sector, it's not simply a matter of saying, oh, I want to contribute to SDG 5 or SDG 1 or 17 or 9. It's really the thinking that digital technologies is the enabler. It's a cross-cutting enabler of all these sustainable development goals. And therefore, the responsibility of the digital sector, ranging from hardware companies to the network operators, to the platform providers and the software companies, is really about making sure that they are contributing positively to change the digital sector for the better, so that no one is left behind and we mitigate the risks and harms to technology. So that's sort of the WBA way and approach to the digital inclusion issue. So WBA does not only look at the digital sector. We look at 7 systems that includes the financial system, banks, investors. You have the circular system that includes manufacturing. You have food and agriculture, where you try to drive better nutrition, better food for all, as well as sustainable food production. There are around, in the benchmarking work that we do in the food and agriculture sector, for example, there are around 350 companies in itself. Finance is 400 companies. So then there's also the urban sector. Then of course there's energy and decarbonization, covering utilities, energy producers, car manufacturers as well. And then of course there is the sector that is close to our heart, the digital sector, which will cover 200 companies. These companies are very diverse. They're all over the world, but a lot of them are also in Asia. And you will probably be familiar with their names. So let me show you where they would be and who they are. So these companies, as you can see, cover the broad range of everyone in this sector, from telcos to internet media services, to hardware, to e-commerce. There's even what we call real estate, surprisingly. So Equinix, Digital Realty Trust, colocation, and data centers are actually considered real estate. You have software and IT services, many of them from India. So you also have Infosys or HCL, for example. From China, there are a lot of companies, and we are familiar with the names of these companies as well. Huawei, Meituan Dianping, JD.com, Lenovo, Xiaomi, Sina, and ByteDance, and all the big names and brands coming out of China. There's also in Southeast Asia, we have Grab, for example. We have the telcos, of course, Axiata from Malaysia, Telkom Indonesia. We have the Philippine long distance company, and in the coming years, Globe Telecom will also be added. So we have all these companies who are already providing services to the world, to the region. And it's really about thinking about what is their responsibility towards SDGs? What is fundamentally the core of that responsibility? And the core of that responsibility relates to their business and how that business can actually promote SDGs. So then you take it closer to the digital sector. So I've already talked about the digital transformation that's required, no one left behind, mitigating risks and harms. So the other thing is also to drive this positive change in the digital sector, you need some kind of accountability mechanism to transform market competition into some kind of race to the top. So it's just unleashing these forces of market competition, essentially, but making it towards more positive things. So what we're doing, therefore, is to develop a benchmark that will track how these companies are helping advance a more inclusive digital economy. This benchmark is different from other benchmarks largely because it's a public good. It's free and publicly available. And therefore, if you're from a think tank in this audience, if you're an academic, for example, doing research, if you're a consultant, even if you're a company, whether you are in or out of the benchmark, if you're from government, if you're from civil society, the data, the methodology, the results of the benchmark are free and publicly available. So we provide it as a public good. The idea is to empower people with more information to understand where the sector is going, where it is doing good, and where it needs to do more good as well. So that's the purpose of the Digital Inclusion Benchmark. It's coming out this November 2020. Right now we are in the data gathering phase. 2020 will cover 100 companies, and by 2023 it will become 200 companies. It will be published annually, and it's shared very widely with government, civil society, and especially with investors who are also allies in WBA. So investor allies are now more than 6 trillion assets under management. Recently, we welcomed a new ally, Fidelity Investments. So the investors in this sense are very important in driving change, in that they go to AGMs, they do shareholder engagement, and they talk to companies closely about their performance and their actions. So by bringing them together towards a common purpose that is bigger than just profit, but purpose for society as a whole, that's quite powerful as well. It's a powerful tool. So the benchmark is new, but it recognizes existing industry initiatives and aligns with reporting standards. So the indicators are new, but they're not exactly that new. So there are, for example, if you're familiar with the space, there's the Global Reporting Initiative, there's the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board. They've come up with harmonized ways to report on company actions. And we have incorporated those reporting standards into our indicators. There are not a lot of other benchmarks in the space because digital technology is new and it is young. It's not like the food sector where there is a load of corporate benchmarks. For example, in pharmaceutical, you probably might be aware of the access to medicine benchmark, which has really helped driven the debate and narrative towards making sure people have access to generics. So we've incorporated that, these other reporting standards and one other benchmark called the Digital Rights Benchmark, just using some of their indicators in the benchmark itself. So it was done through a multi-stakeholder process. A real life dialogue like this. We've met in Mumbai, for example. Some of you I have met in Mumbai, literally. Then we took it to China, where we did a lot of individual discussions, and we also did a lot of group discussions that were facilitated by the Chinese Ministry of Commerce. And then we also took it to Silicon Valley. We had a, technically Stanford is not in Silicon Valley, but roughly in the area. We had a roundtable there participated by the American companies as well. So there was a really year-long consultation process to come up together with what things we can measure to encourage this race to the top. So all these companies in the benchmark, they cover the world. They might be headquartered somewhere, but they have subsidiaries everywhere, and they do cover the world. So basically, impact is at a global level. So once the data is out, once the results are out, the methodology is already public as well. It's online, it's on our website, and Matt can share that with everyone afterwards if anyone is interested. then all of you here can take that methodology and basically use it to create even more impact. And for civil society, the call to action is to use the results to find the gaps where we are falling through and not doing so well in making the digital technologies even more inclusive. Then help us amplify, help us create that environment where companies are encouraged indeed to do good and to do more good for society. So a brief overview, the benchmark has 4 measurement areas. So one is really improving access. The second measurement area is enhancing skills. The third measurement area is fostering use to trust. And finally, the last measurement area is on innovation. So each measurement area has 4 indicators. So companies are tracked on all these 16 indicators using publicly available information. Missing information is essentially scored as a 0. This is to drive transparency and encourage really action on the part of companies. That digital inclusion in a broad sense is a shared responsibility of the sector. So once again, that's 4 measurement areas. You have access, you have use, you have skills, and you have innovation. I'm sure many of us who have worked in this sector for quite some time had this idea that digital inclusion was very narrow. So when we think about it, we think, oh, it's like, let's build a new fiber connection to this village in a rural part of the country. Then we are helping drive digital inclusion. That's one part of it. That's the foundation. That's a basic part of it. But beyond that, once you have material access, you still need people to have the skills to make use of that material access. So what are you doing to help towards developing those skills? Not only basic skills, but also more technical, more job market skills. Then even if you have the skills, if there are barriers, say people are afraid, they don't trust, there's privacy issues, there's security issues, there are risks and harms, and they don't trust technology, it prevents them from using it beneficially. So then you also have to look at what are the things that need to be done to foster essentially that trust. So for example, if you look at indicator number 4, the company mitigates digital risks and harms, I'm pretty sure we can think of so many things that are becoming clear now, especially with our politics, with our discussions with each other in society, the increased polarization. The benchmark does not cover everything. That's a lot yet. In the first year, what it does cover is the very basic child online protection, because we often forget children are often the first adopters of technology, and we need to think very closely about how we are facilitating their safe use. And we often, and this is the most forgotten, actually my pet peeve, we forget that it's not just about people using the technology as consumers, as end users, but also to share in the benefits of the digital economy. You need to have the opportunities to innovate. Innovation is not just for advanced countries. Innovation is for everyone. Innovation is for Asians. Innovation is for Africans. Innovation is for Latin Americans. So how is the company helping to facilitate that? By practicing open innovation, by supporting technology innovation ecosystems, especially in developing countries, collaborating on big data for sustainable development use, and starting with your own practice, applying inclusive and ethical research and development. And we've seen what happens when technology developers are pretty homogeneous, as we would say. They tend to be male. So imagine the possibilities if there are people of color, people of different cultures, ethnicities, perspectives, and gender, especially more when women involved. Imagine the possibilities in how we can actually use technologies, develop them in ways that actually answer our needs as a society. So that's the benchmark in essence. We are providing it to all of you as a tool that you can use, and we hope that that is helpful. And the discussion that we are actually going to be having later is we hope to think together with you about how this data, these results, these findings can be more useful to you in your work, in your commitment towards driving digital inclusion. So I look forward to that. Thank you. That's all.
Great, thank you, Lourdes. Great, do you want to stop sharing your screen as well? If you haven't already, it might be a bit slow. Great, yeah, thanks so much, Lourdes. It's nice to see you all. I'm Matt Gwynn and I work in the digital system engagement at the World Benchmarking Alliance. We've been emailing a lot, so it's nice to see you here on Zoom today. Just a few house rules. We welcome this to be a dialogue and we'd like for you to speak openly and freely. Feel free to ask any questions on the chat and the text function, but hopefully we'll have a time to give everyone a chance to speak during the dialogue itself. When you speak, if you could just take a second to introduce yourself as well. I'm conscious probably some of us know each other, but for those others, it's nice to see where you are and what organisation you're working for. Before we start the conversation, we have a few very special speakers who will help us kind of kickstart the conversation. We have Esperanza Mantpe. She's a senior statistician in the ICT Data and Statistics Division at the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union. SB is actually a part of our expert review committee as well on the benchmark, so she's been kind of pivotal in helping us develop our work. We also have Helene Galpaya, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Learn Asia. As you'll know, Learn Asia is very well known for its advocacy work on digital issues in the region, and they've been involved and helping us with our consultations throughout, specifically in Mumbai last year, where I think me and Lourdes met a few of you. So to kick things off, can I welcome SP? Great.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Lourdes, for this invitation to speak to you this morning from Geneva, and hello, good afternoon to everybody in Asia. So I'm very happy actually to see Frank, and I think this is really a great opportunity to see everybody, you know, through this occasion. So I'm very happy to be part of this panel. So this morning I'll be sharing with you the work that we are doing in the ITU and how it relates to the work that WBA is doing in terms of benchmarking. So just to introduce to you myself, I'm Esperanza Magpantay. As Matt mentioned, I'm the senior statistician of the ITU, which is the International Telecommunication Union. And so our core work, especially from the division where I came from, is the collection and dissemination of information and communication statistics. So the work that we do is sort of complementary to what WBA is doing, because we work mainly with countries in terms of collecting the data that reflects what is happening in the ICT arena. So the work that we do is mainly collecting information that relates, for example, to connectivity. So how many mobile subscriptions, for example, how many mobile broadband subscriptions and fixed broadband subscriptions are there in a country, as well as data that are coming from household surveys. So how many people are using the internet, how many people are using mobile phone, for example. So this type of work is really, I would say, necessary and useful to assess how countries are doing in terms of their ICT usage and access. And this is exactly, I would say, similar to what WBA work is doing in terms of benchmarking companies. The only difference is that we are focusing on countries. So I would say this is really a very pertinent work in terms of assessing the companies in terms of their commitments to connect people and to help achieve sustainable development goals. In the ITU, we are also very committed in doing that. And as a matter of fact, we are a specialized agency in terms of monitoring 5 SDG indicators that relates to ICT access and use. And so far, for example, what we found out in our analysis of our household data is that there's a huge gap between countries still and people in terms of using ICTs. Especially what we found is that those that are really on the disadvantaged side are people coming from rural areas, women, elderly, with low income. And so all those features are a necessary concern, I would say, to countries and hopefully for companies as well, in terms of when they deploy their activities or their services, that they need to focus on those disadvantaged groups so that they will be able to take also the benefits of what we are experiencing right now. I think this pandemic that we are now is a good example of what ICTs can bring to everybody. And we are very fortunate that we can, for example, participate in this call because we have very good internet connection or a good mobile broadband coverage. But this is not happening in some parts of the world and in some parts of the community or in the society. So this is a very, I would say, alarming scenario that companies and countries should not neglect. This is an area that I would say benchmarking can play a big role. In the ITU, when we benchmark countries, we point to areas where policymaking should focus their attention when developing policies that will improve ICT access and use. And so the WBA benchmarking work will help specifically companies in terms of delivering their social responsibility in terms of connecting people, in terms of providing services, in terms of, for example, having attractive prices so that people can take advantage on the use of ICTs. And there's challenges that are, I would say, very prominent or recognized. For example, the gender gap is there, so women are not necessarily having the same access and use of ICTs. Skills is a big issue. This is when we analyze the ICT access and use, what we found out is that even though you have access to ICTs, you have access to mobile broadband, for example, the signal and everything, if you don't have the necessary skills to use ICTs, it's a big barrier. And so I think companies have also a big role to play in this arena, because this is where they could provide services that could cater the different levels of ICT skills the population have. Innovation is also a very important area, and I think companies have a big role to play here, because they should be I would say, the place where incubators or research where these things should happen. And I think this is really a good initiative that this benchmarking work is doing. Another important work and area that companies should really look at, and I think this is something that is very close to my heart these days, is in the use of big data. So we know, for example, that there's a lot of countries where household surveys are not being conducted because this is a very costly initiative. This is a very huge undertaking for countries where there's other more urgent priorities. And so household surveys are not necessarily conducted in these countries. So big data coming from companies will play a big role. I am part of this UN Global Working Group on big data, leading the work on the use of mobile phone big data for measuring the information society and for measuring the different areas of statistics. So using mobile phone big data. And one of the main issues that we found is that data access is really a very huge area that we need to tackle. Even though you have the infrastructure to analyze big data, you have the necessary skills, you have enough data scientists, but if companies does not allow access to the data for social purposes or for statistical purposes, it won't be possible for this data to be explored. And so the benefits of big data are not necessarily fully exploited. So this is really an important area that companies should also look at in terms of freeing the data that they have, sharing resources. Of course, this is taking into consideration all the security components that they have to put in place so that data are used and not misused by the people that are not necessarily that they don't fall in bad hands. So these are the areas that I would say are very important points that this benchmark should really capture. And I'm happy actually when I look at the list of indicators that this is one of the key indicators that is included in the list of the 16 indicators. So I think I'll stop here. There's a lot of areas that we could discuss afterwards, but I'm very excited to see the results of this work by the WBA. I, from myself, will be contributing and will continue to contribute in terms of my statistical expertise, in terms of developing an index, in terms of the methodological side. And I'm very excited to see how many companies will be not just be included in the index, but will be implementing whatever this benchmark would suggest afterwards. And of course, everybody would like to see that the benefits of this benchmark is not just on the publications or on paper, but really, putting this into practice, having people benefit from whatever this benchmark could translate to good policy making, to good policies that will benefit everybody, so that the rest of the world who are still unconnected will be able to be connected and reap the benefits of ICTs. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to discuss further afterwards. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, SB. Some really great calls to action there. So hopefully we'll have time to explore those further later. Can I welcome Helene Garpaya?
Thanks, Matt. Great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Good to see you, SB, again. So I broadly second sort of SP's enthusiasm, in the spirit of what gets measured gets improved, at least slowly. I think this is a great start, right? And I think of things like Rebecca McKinnon's, Ranking Digital Rights Index, which had all the problems of creating an index, but finally it's put a set of indicators out there that people are reporting on, correctly or incorrectly, but it's really put the focus, and we have some data, and we have more data than we had before. And it's a very different call for action from the companies than being forced to report by governments. So I think this is quite welcome. On the other hand, what gets measured also can be gamed. So I think the worry here is that there can be a lot of tokenism involved in rising high up in the rankings. And that's always a problem that I think you guys who are doing this research will have to watch out for. So one of the, I run just by way of introduction, I run a small research and policy think tank called Learn Asia, and we work in South and Southeast Asia. So, you know, and we work in, I would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like the 5 of the chevrons that you, or the puzzle pieces that you worked on. And one of the things we do is we try to bring ground level data to policymakers or private sector. So we study a lot about users, because in the end, what matters is, yes, the private sector companies are possibly the most important players in the digital sector, but what matters certainly to us is what's happening on the ground. And what's happening on the ground, as Esperanza mentioned, is not very encouraging when it comes to South and Southeast Asian countries. Connectivity, I mean, mobile phone ownership is high, around the 70s, 80% of the population owns a mobile phone, but internet connectivity is very low. We're talking about 30% of people in Sri Lanka above the age of 15 being connected. We are talking about 20 to 25% of people in India. Now, these numbers always shock people because they are very different to the number of SIM cards that are out there, right? When an Indian telecom sector happily says that they sold 500 million SIM cards, it's a completely different story to understanding how many actual users came online. But more importantly, I think for this indicator, it's a different thing to understanding who these users are. As Esperanza mentioned, the growth now is not, you know, used to be about upselling to existing customers. So the voice moved to data, data to 3G, 3G to 4G, etc. But that race has left a large group of people completely unconnected. So that is the truth on the ground, and it is unclear whether those things can be highlighted here, and it would be good. So for example, the fact that in, let's say, a country like India, that there is a 53% gap in social media use between men and women, or that there is a let's say 50% gap in urban and rural users in Pakistan, or 66% urban-rural gap in Bangladesh. These things really matter because this is where the unconnected people are. So at one level, this is not a company problem. Companies are there to sell, make a good profit, offer a decent service. Now here, they're not doing a great job either. And I'm not blaming companies, by the way. The government in our countries have a lot to do with this, right? We have ended up with a business model that is extremely low prices. If you think about it, recent ITU report, Sri Lanka, India, Sri Lanka, the lowest prices in Asia, right? It's ridiculous. And yet to only have connected 30% of our people is a problem, right? India, almost the second lowest in Asia, and yet to only have connected, again, under 25%, of the people is a problem. But really identifying where the pockets of unconnected are is important. I know you pay attention to skill, but this is, again, coming back to the index, is one of the questions I have. The unit of analysis is a country, and it's very easy for a firm to say that, yes, we spend money on training rural youth, for example, on digital security, on access. But what is the sort of the scale in comparison to their market size is really, really important, right? And this goes back to tokenism. Every OTT, every software company, operating company, they go and they fund training. I mean, Sri Lanka is a case in point. We don't, the big companies are all doing trainings, right? But it is a drop in the bucket in the grand scheme of what is actually needed. Again, the problem is not only with the companies. When the government taxes them heavily and keeps $4 billion of India's universal service funds in an account and not spend it on things like reskilling, there's a much bigger fundamental structural problem. But I think given the size of the companies that are in the top of your list, and I'm not naming any, these things are a drop in the bucket. right? So it's very easy for a company that spends 5% of its budget, let's say on skilling and gendered access, to also get a high mark compared to a company that spends 0.1%, of their budget. And I think those should really be differentiated, because that's when you really get sort of a high level of action. I'm incredibly happy that you are going with the ranking digital rights on the trust and innovation side, because I think that has been a meaningful index. And I would sort of, urge you to also, what isn't sort of showing up in that index is the wide range of companies that you guys have, right? That's a relatively limited sort of OTT and telecom services kind of view of things. But in most of our countries, when it comes to freedom of expression, because they can't, let's say, shut down on international platforms, they will go to the telecom operator. So getting those, even the smaller operators, into that index, if you can work with them, would be one of the biggest wins, I think, right? And I'm happy you're not trying to sort of reinvent the wheel. The last point is about what's on paper. The last point is about, awareness and use. When we ask the large numbers of people who are unconnected in these countries, about half of South Asian people who don't have a phone say they don't need it, right? And about another 40%, for example, in Pakistan, say they're not allowed to own one. And about 33% in Nepal, and I'm just picking random data points, don't know how to use it. So some of the things like skill, I don't know how to use this, is addressed by you. Affordability is possibly addressed under access. There is a huge saliency and awareness thing that possibly is not addressed, and that could be important. And the last point is about what's on paper and what's actual. That's going back to a little bit of that tokenism point that I made, that what actually happens on the ground. What does a skilling program look like at the end of it? Are people actually able to safely use the internet once you go through a training program by company X? Or is it just a matter of getting a whole lot of new users? I mean, this will be good, and that doesn't mean you need to do all of it. This civil society can certainly help to hold these companies to account as they normally do. I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shalini. Thank you.
Thank you, speakers, for the very insightful comments and for setting the right context to start a conversation, because this is a dialogue and we would want everybody to contribute and share their perspective. And I would also invite both our speakers and Lourdes to also participate in the next session and join the conversation. My name is Namit and I work for the World Benchmarking Alliance, and I'm leading public policy in Asia. So a lot of the comments that both the speakers made just now, I think, are going to be very, very relevant in the policy context of Asia, where we would like to take a lot of the evidence emerging from the benchmark, the gaps that emerge from there, in having conversation with governments, with other policy advocates working in the region. I'm based out of New Delhi and working from here. In the next 45 minutes or so, I would be facilitating an informal conversation, inviting all of you to just join in, maybe raise a hand, and I'll request Matt to help me in unmuting whoever wants to make a comment and join the conversation. We will broadly discuss about the contours of digital development and economic growth in Asia, but putting digital inclusion at the core. So keeping in mind that we are looking at digital inclusion and how it is affecting or addressing some of the development and growth challenges in the region. I will also invite a few participants to kickstart the conversation as a fire starter, and then invite others to join the conversation as we go along. And it will be, like Matt had mentioned initially, whoever is speaking, it will be good if you can quickly introduce yourself so that everybody knows who you are and what is your affiliation in terms of organization. So the first question that I would like to explore is, what are the challenges to digital inclusion within Asia as a region? And if I may invite Jeff from Asia Internet Coalition to kickstart the discussion. I'm not sure, Jeff, if you are able to unmute yourself, or Matt, if you can help.
Hey guys, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, Jeff, thank you. So if you could just kickstart.
We can't see you though, Jeff, so.
Oh, I know I had to turn my thing off because I have people doing some work on my air conditioning and stuff like that.
Okay.
So sorry about that. Yeah, so good afternoon. My name is Jeff Payne, or good morning to some of you. My name is Jeff Payne. I'm based in Singapore. I'm the managing director for the Asia Internet Coalition. The Asia Internet Coalition is a grouping of 16 different companies from all over the world, and we work on policy and advocacy issues, not only impacting Asia, but sometimes on global initiatives as well. We've been doing a lot of work over the last couple of years on things like cybersecurity, data privacy, and data protection. And then and most recently, we've been doing a lot of work on digital taxation, as this has become a very important part of many of our member companies who are global in nature, but they don't necessarily have offices in all the countries that they're operating in or popular in, for that matter. So yeah, so that's a bit about AIC, and you know, again, our team is spread out across all of Asia. So we have people in the Philippines, we have people in Indonesia, we have people in Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, India. I always forget one, but we have a lot of people, and mostly focused on tech policy and yeah, in Japan as well. So I knew I forgot something, but yeah, so that's a bit about AIC. I want to thank you guys for inviting us to this conference. I think it's been really helpful to learn about what WBA is all about and the great work that you're doing. And I do think someone who brought up the point, you know, when you measure things, there's always ways to look at how you improve things. So I thought that was a very astute point that was made. So thank you for that. I don't know specifically if you wanted me to say anything else, like about a certain topic, or can you tell me now?
So if you could respond to this question in terms of what are the challenges that you see to digital inclusion within Asia, I think that will be a good kickstart.
So I think the challenge is, you know, it's amazing. The COVID-19 pandemic has really highlighted a lot of the challenges that have existed forever. Digital inclusion has been a challenge in this region for a long time. And then you also, one of the key things that we've got as a challenge in ASEAN is not only digital inclusion, but digital literacy, actually skills about how to leverage technology. Many of the studies that we've seen over the past probably 5 years regularly highlight the lack of IT talent in ASEAN, and they usually talk about ASEAN as a block rather than specific countries. But definitely a lot of the work that we do with our technology clients is how to build the next digital citizens and how to actually have a more inclusive framework, because especially in times like this where everyone is relying on technology a lot more than they have in the past. So it's been a very big eye-opener for many. And I do think that it was encouraging to see when a lot of the governments were coming out with their various stimulus packages. It was encouraging to see places like Indonesia and Singapore really talking about how they're going to invest more and more in digital infrastructure. I mean, Singapore has accelerated. One of the programs they had was to put a electronic device or a tablet or a computer in every single student's hand in 7 years. They've now accelerated that to 2021. So I think those types of bold moves are what we're seeing a lot more of in this region. And I do think that that's a good thing for the region. And hopefully it's a positive of this negative pandemic that we're all living through. But I have seen not only in the education space, but definitely we've also seen in the company space, like a lot of companies are looking at how they do business, leveraging technologies like this Zoom technology, for example. You know, how do you ensure that the data is being protected, it's secure, and things like that have become a lot more important.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for highlighting the challenge.
Just one final point. So
Yeah.
not only do we work with the 16 members of the AIC, the Asia Internet Coalition, but we also do work a lot directly with a lot of technology companies. And there has been a very big push on digital literacy, which is a form of inclusion in the sense that we work with vulnerable groups who may not have the digital literacy. You know, many of the young people on this call are probably all digital citizens, but not everybody is. So I think that if you look at certain vulnerable groups, there's been a very big push by a lot of big technology companies to really improve the inclusion aspect of the work that they do.
So we see a number of the AIC companies actually are part of the benchmark, Jeff, and we hope to see high engagement from them as well.
Oh, I just found my video. The people are finished fixing my aircon now. So yeah, no, that's great. And I think that they definitely want to do that. And it's actually, it's almost like a shared value model. Realistically, the more digitally literate people are, the better it is for their business. So it's a win-win.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for highlighting the challenges and also, you know, shining light on some of the opportunities that you see in the region. I think that's equally important. And now I would like to invite other participants to share their perspectives on the challenges they foresee. And I think Anju and Zahid have their hands up. So if I could invite Anju followed by Zahid to unmute themselves and just make their points.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Anju and based in Fiji. I work with the Alliance for Affordable Internet in Web Foundation, and we work to drive down the cost of internet access in low and middle income countries through policy and regulatory reform. So I'm thoroughly enjoying the discussions. I echo the same sentiments as Helani in regards to connectivity, which I feel is one of the key challenges that we're working on and we're also facing. And in the Asia Pacific region, the answer is, well, the reason is cost and affordability. So in most of the developed world, a fast, reliable internet connection costs less than 1% of average monthly income, as of course Helani mentioned in some of the countries, but women and rural communities and the vulnerable people like persons with disability are hardest hit by high prices. And this has been quite obvious in the recent months during COVID-19 crisis. And we see that there is a huge gap of people using ICT and the people that are not using ICT, or people who can afford devices and data and people who cannot. So driven by the belief that affordability should not be a barrier to internet access, we used combination of advocacy, research, and in-country engagement to develop the policies. And we just launched the Meaningful Connectivity Standards, so would love to share it with the speakers and obviously with the participants. And in terms of, well, in short, for us, digital inclusion should be part of a framework for assessing and considering the readiness of communities to provide access to opportunities, particularly in this digital age. And we would like to see this within the digital transformation and ICT policies. The other thing that I wanted to mention was in terms of challenge, when we talk about digital divide and digital literacy, and into discussions for policymakers, sometimes people don't understand the terminology digital inclusion. So how do we make this terminology very easy for people to understand, so they understand that, okay, this is going to be part of a more practical policy-driven approach, and of course that addresses the real challenges, the needs of communities as a whole. So yeah, these are my points, and would love to work with you. We obviously work with ITU and few other participants that are engaged in this webinar. I'm not familiar with the methodology, but we would love to provide insights in making sure we don't reinvent the wheel and duplicate efforts. Thanks.
Thanks, Sanju. And it will be really interesting if you can post the link to the initiative that you mentioned in the chat so that everybody can have a look at that. And with that, Zahid, do you want to go next?
Yeah, hi. My name is Zahid Jamil. I'm a legal and policy, an attorney and legal policy consultant in Pakistan. And, Hilani and I were together on the MAG at some stage. I've, done a lot of stuff on ICANN. I'm also the chair of the Digital Economy Commission. And my chair of the ICC Pakistan is actually nice to see him. He's also joined us today. I had a quick question, and then it may impact what I will say afterwards. I just wanted to get a quick response. I see that this benchmarking is related to the most influential companies. Are you as WBA conducting a benchmarking regarding the government policies?
Our work in WBA is actually on corporate benchmarks because that is what was found to be a huge gap in the space given the commitment of the private sector to SDGs. So we focus on corporate actors. We do have policy work, but it is in relation to SDGs and also the corporate benchmarks and the corporate sector efforts, especially in relation to sustainable finance. I believe there's SP from IT already does a lot of company benchmarking work.
Right. So let me respond to that actually. The ITU does a great job of benchmarking various things and sort of, indicators. But one of the things we notice is that we don't get a lot of what is really happening in our countries, at least in Asia Pacific, on the ground. I mean, I can talk about a massive, not a gap, but an abyss of a gap as far as benchmarking related to SDGs are concerned. And I'm also going to talk about tokenization. And so there's a lot of tokenization about SDGs and conversations by governments when they discuss SDGs and how they're going to implement it. But my goodness, we're going to 45 minutes is not going to be enough to cover the kind of challenges that government faces when they're dealing with the policy issues that keep them from being able to provide access, provide skills, provide many other things. So, just to give you an example, and I'm coming from, I'll just take the one I know best is my country in Pakistan. We've just had a situation where we want to have a data protection law, which is being run by the intelligence services. That's a complete anathema to the concept of data protection. We want to localize all data. We want to make sure that anybody who's a user wants to register, use a VPN has to register that VPN with the government. There's a bunch, and then we want to tax folks that are not in our country. Now, with that kind of an environment, I would like to focus also, I'm suggesting that you also focus on the abyss that exists on the benchmarking related to governments. So I do agree that there's, and I support what I've seen so far in what you've done is very helpful. I think it's excellent. It will help in discussing what are the areas that businesses could do more in. And I completely agree that there's a certain sense of why aren't they doing more in, their CSR projects, etc. I would like to see more of my telecom companies who've gotten very cozy with the government because they've got a deal with the government that nobody else can get licenses, right? Again, that brings the government into the picture. So talking about the gaps that are created, as a result of these sort of government policies, is going to be important. I mean, I know that Jeff is on here from AIC, and they've done a lot of good work trying to work with government recently with the telecom regulator and the ministry, trying to stop this citizens protection, social harm. Social media is harmful for the citizens. We need to protect the citizens from social media. Oh my goodness. And that kind of stuff. So I wanted to sort of echo something that I think you'll hear from many of the people, maybe not directly because they're big companies, they don't want to say this stuff, but since I'm an attorney, as a citizen, it's very frustrating for us as far as access is concerned when we hear that our VPNs are going to be shut off, that data is going to be localized, that we are not going to be able to access Amazon AWS because it doesn't have a local data center in the country. Those are the kind of things. And if I try to do it, I'm committing a criminal offense. These kind of things can be a challenge. So I would suggest that at the same time, you also focus on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Zahid. And in fact, I mean, our objective is to look at policy coherence in the region and in other countries based on the evidence and the gaps that we identify from the benchmark. So those are very, very useful comments. And I would like to now ask Trisha, who wanted to make a point. If you could just introduce yourself and respond to this question.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
Trisha, go ahead.
So my name is Trisha Ray, and I'm a junior fellow with the Cyber Initiative at the Observer Research Foundation. And I recently joined the UNESCO's Working Group on Information Accessibility. So definitely a set of issues that I'll be doing a lot more thinking over the coming year on. So one issue I wanted to raise, and I'm not sure whether there can be a benchmarking or policy solution to this, is I hesitate to say cultural, but social, perhaps, barriers to access. And an example of that would be, for instance, here in India, even if a cell phone is under a woman's name, especially if you're lower class or lower income, the husband often has control of the actual device. And so while on paper you can say, okay, so many people, women own phones, in reality, there is still a barrier that maybe policy can fix, maybe it can't fix, but certainly something that we need to be aware of going forward. Thank you.
Great point. Thanks, Trisha. With that, let's move on to the second question, which looks at how will more inclusive digital services, products, and platforms positively impact digital development?
Mr. Namit, I'd like to make a point. Mr. Namit, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
All right, listen, I'm the chairman of the National Committee of the ICC in Pakistan, under which the Digital Commission comes. I've been working on these issues for years, and I've been true to the spirit of the matter, and I've been seeing what's been happening internationally in all kinds of things for quite some years. What I saw after the 5G controversy that came up, and I'm very glad to see the ITU is here. ITU is a very important organization, let me tell you. It's very historical also. What I see is a gap. I think you need to make, and I'm not trying to be controversial and I'm not trying to make it sensational. I'm saying you need a United Nations Charter for the virtual world. Why? Because you're all young, most of you are young, most of you are connected. There are no borders here, okay, in the virtual world. Some kind of symbolic charter. I know you have WSIS and you have bases and all, you know, Mr. Jamil will tell you all of this. He's our point man for all of this. But I just would like to suggest that is there an international charter in the virtual world aside from the analog world? I mean, do you have a charter? I mean, I don't think the UN, because it's all government officials in the UN, they are taking private sector people now and then, but really it's government nominees. And therefore, I think you people are the real free people. And I think that, not that you're not free in the UN, but I just feel you need a charter. I don't know why you don't have a charter. Maybe it's just too idealistic, but it's good to have the ideals on paper, whether it has any effect or not, but at least it's established. Mr. Jamil, maybe you can enlighten me on this a little more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tariq. Just to clarify, we are not part of the United Nations. We are an independent organization. So I think that's just a clarification I wanted to make, but a very valid point.
But you don't have a charter. Do you have a charter? The WBA has a charter. What is your charter? What is your commitment to this freedom of the internet? And where is that consensus document of all the countries? I think that's an ideal worth fighting for, worth achieving, even if it's on paper. This is my suggestion to you, and I'd support it any way you want. Thank you very much.
Point taken. I think that's very useful suggestion, and we'll come back to you on that. And I would like to now move on to the second question, trying to look at how inclusive digital services, products, and platforms can positively impact digital development within Asia. And I would like to invite Daniel from ICC to share his thoughts on this to begin with. Daniel, if you're able to unmute. Yes. I think
Hi, good day, everyone. My name is Daniel Kok, and a pleasure to connect here today. I manage the ICC Academy, the learning arm of International Chambers of Commerce, and I'm based in Singapore. I think coming back to your question about how much how will more inclusive digital services, products, and platforms positively impact digital development. I think all of us do agree that it impacts positively, and you have actually put it in your 4 measurements, access, skills, used, as well as innovations. So we all agree, or most of us agree, that greater digital inclusion will help businesses build capabilities and access services. So, what I like to do is just to share with you an example of our work in improving accesses and upscaling. You see. So the Academy has a strong presence in Asia, including countries where digital divide is a challenge, and a lot of people struggles to get into some professions without any training support. Example, with our online education today, we bring people to a level of industry recognized operational, whether they come from Singapore, Cambodia, Brunei, or Vietnam, to build capacity in international trade and trade finance. So there has been countries where, example, Singapore hub, where you are able to get a lot of expertise, coming in through the company, through the regions, providing knowledge transfer. But in countries like Vietnam, Brunei, Philippines, even India, we saw is that a lot of people struggles to get into these professions because the knowledge transfer is not easily available. So ICC Academy here play a platform into bridging this gap through our online education, and our programs are written by global professionals, well-known practitioners who are willing to share that consistent and knowledge which we are able to deliver consistently. Okay. Now, our platform here today also, provides the tool to reach many, because as I mentioned, many of them may not have access to education. And as a result of this digital platform today, our programs for key sectors such as trade and finance are actually accessed by more than 167 countries today. We were established only in 2015-16, and over the last 4 years, we managed to use the technology platform to reach out to more than 167 countries. I think that is an example of what, how much more we are able to positively impact. As a representative of, the Asia Dynamic City, we speak to our peers, not just those who are equally technologically advanced, but everyone. So, if someone has a device, IT knowledge, and obviously internet accessibility, I think he or she will be able to adapt, assess, tools on the internet and, ICC content as well. Access to this, and you know that access to some of these specializations, such as trade finance, requires a higher profile education and indeed financial capabilities as well. So, ICC Academy has been working daily towards the SDG targets, trying to provide some universal affordable access to the least developed countries. We encouraged inclusion for all. And even today, as we continue our work to strengthen our works, our objective in the SDG, we continue to work with partners, and we invite anyone who are interested to continue to explore working with us to support the business community in Asia. So I'll stop here. I mean, I just wanted to share these two areas where I believe the ICC has demonstrated how using the platform has been able to, leverage and expand the benefits of digital inclusion. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. And now I would like to invite, I see a couple of hands, Bidisha, followed by Helani, and the representative from the Internet Society Philippines. if in that order, if you could just unmute yourselves and make your comments.
Hello, everyone, and I'm glad to be here, and thanks for a very enriching conversation. I just wanted to raise one point that I understand that we are talking about digital inclusion, but sometimes, when, especially in connection to these private companies, when you push for digital products and platform, what is the implication for this push in an Asian context where Helene already talked about that how a large section of our population is still outside the fold of ICTs, that pushing for digital products and platform may lead to further exclusion of people, not just from digital technologies, but other things that they were doing, like the larger social exclusion, I mean. I do a lot of work on Aadhaar, and that's why it came to my mind that when Aadhaar kind of a digital identity project is pushed for, a lot of debates around how does that lead to people being excluded from many of the welfare benefits. And this exclusion is a product of a digital technology being pushed. So I think that's something that we should keep in mind. And thank you.
Great point, Vidisha. Hilani?
Hi, thank you. I'm going back to the comment, I think, was it Daniel who was just talking about, broadly your question about more inclusive digital services. A couple of points I wanted to make. I mean, unlike in the ASEAN region, which actually has done a lot to bring about frictionless e-commerce, even across national borders, the South Asia region has done an incredibly poor job, actually. And in a lot of South Asian and, of course, African countries, I mean, we have real physical barriers to the development, right? So something as simple as having digitally geo-mapped address space, that is, when you give a particular address, it actually tells you how to get there and exactly where it is, something we take for granted in developed economies, right, is a real problem to the growth of e-commerce, because then you can't guarantee that the courier will get there in a particular time, right? These are such analog problems that we have to digital development that we do really need to solve. And that's just one of them. Then there are other things. I know you have a whole pillar on financial inclusion in the broader benchmarking alliance. But so if you look at doing work online, like remote work, gig work, doing software and graphic design, that kind of stuff, right? A cloud-based gig work. Getting paid is one of the fundamental problems. A country like Sri Lanka doesn't allow PayPal, for example, right? That is the dominant payment mechanism, right? So if you can't get paid, why on earth would you work on these platforms? If you don't have PayPal, you're now paying about 24% or more for sort of intermediate money transfer mechanisms. The other broader issue, because we study work online, so there's lots of, care work, like, cleaning, delivery services, the Ubers, everyone knows this, and these are expanding in all our countries. And there was this big hope that this, there was so much informal activity in the economy that was in the cash-based economy, the taxi drivers and the cleaners, and now suddenly this would make it formal. And to some extent it has, if we define formality as just being visible. Now we actually know that X number of women are doing house cleaning on the 5 top platforms in India. We know how many Uber drivers are. But that's really not formalization in the way of inclusion. What has that gotten us? Nothing. These people still can't prove their income and go get a bank loan, right? Because this income is not recognized, and these big platforms are not doing a good job. Sometimes actually what is needed for a bank is to make their monthly income look like a pay stub, right? So very basic stuff is not done. So we're talking about, really big gaps to work towards a real, digital development from where we are now. It's a very rudimentary state where it's serving us who want to, find our cleaners and get our stuff delivered. and get from point A to B at incredibly lower rates and on demand and all of that. That's great, but real development comes when the people who are selling their labor or goods or services are able to actually really contribute, and these numbers show up in the economy, and we're very far from that. And in our national surveys in 22 countries, and please look at that, it's called After Access if you go to our website, learnasia.net. While the number of, overall, the adoption of sort of digital platforms for commercial activities is low, that is the usage base. So we are talking in a country like Sri Lanka, 900,000 people who've done anything like transport, buying goods, hiring help, booking an Airbnb, buying tickets online, etc. In India, we're probably looking at about 42 million plus about a year and a half ago. In Cambodia, 200,000. In Nepal, 187,000. These are not big numbers, but these are the buyers. Right. When we look at the sellers, the numbers are significantly worse. So that is what is really important, I think, if you're talking about measurable contribution to digital development.
All right.
And may I make a very quick point? In terms of use, I think we do need to move away from, access as a binary definition. And I think somebody was asking that from A4AI, like, what does inclusion mean? At least to get a sense of, over time, are we moving from basic, I have a phone tick box, or I have Facebook tick box, to a rich set of users that can be social and emotional well-being and connectedness to society, but also being able to buy things, sell things, search for things, exercising your freedom of expression. So there's a range of inclusion I think we should not view as a, I'm online and therefore, right, we've achieved accessibility and inclusion. True. Thanks.
Thanks for bringing in that nuance, and that inclusion is a continuum. I think that's very, very important. I would also open up the third question, which is, what is the role of a free and publicly available corporate benchmark like the Digital Inclusion Benchmark for driving digital inclusion and development? And I know somebody from the Internet Society Philippines wanted to come in and make a point. So if you would want to now unmute yourself, while others can also raise their hand and indicate if they want to make a point on how do they see the role of publicly available corporate benchmarks in driving more digital inclusion.
Thanks for that, Namit, and thanks to everyone else for being on the call. So I'm Angelo Gutierrez. I'm from the Internet Society Philippines chapter, and we have a particular focus on driving changes and reform to policy environments in order to encourage digital inclusion and bridge the gap in access that we see not just in the Philippines, but really all over the region, all over the world. So we at our chapter believe that digital inclusion is best achieved through affordable, accessible, and reliable connectivity. And this goes back to the idea of what kind of access we want to enable. If we want people to make use of connectivity in ways that are meaningful and relevant to them, we can't just give them a connection and say that's done. So we need to make sure that it's something that is capable of giving them access to the content and services that are necessary, especially during this pandemic, right? And in our chapter, we believe this is best possible by enabling different service providers to use a wide variety of technologies and business models. So for the Philippines in particular, although I have a feeling that this is true for many different contexts, this means creating an investment-friendly, technologically neutral policy environment, while also taking into account principles of privacy, security, and net neutrality, especially when we talk about content that is meaningful to everyone. It's important that everyone has a diversity of choices into what they can get. And that means an internet that is open and accessible. So we think a corporate benchmark can be a very useful guide, especially in the Philippines, where the telecom and broadband sectors are very private sector led. And network operators in particular have a key role in shaping ICT access and innovation. A lot of how the connectivity landscape is shipped in the Philippines comes from the private sector, especially in the past years. So looking at what private sector players are doing is an important guide, not just to uh, gauging the level of development, but we think more importantly shaping policy, because ultimately we believe that providing a diversity of choices in technology and providers and content is most likely when policymakers, especially the government, take an active role in developing the digital ecosystem. Otherwise, we end up with an unevenly developed ecosystem where certain technologies and business models dominate. This is how you get people accessing only services through, say, Facebook or Google, through policies or services like zero rating, right? And while this is good to start with, we think that providing meaningful connectivity means being able to give people access to all of the services that the internet can provide. In the Philippines, the majority of people access the internet exclusively via mobile, and very few have access to wired internet. From a technology perspective, this also limits the kind of activities that people can do and how much connectivity can make meaningful changes in their lives. And similarly, many users, they only see zero-rated content from the likes of Facebook and Google, raising questions of competition. And more importantly, this is an issue of people's right to access information from the open internet, not just those curated by select platforms. So we at the Internet Society Philippines chapter, we hope that the benchmark can really help inform policymaking by looking into what sort of content corporations offer the users, for instance, what technologies are used to access the content and at what price, and how these affect access to truly free and open internet. We believe that this benchmark is filling a gap in providing us a broader picture of what digital development would and should look like in the coming years. And that means an interaction between private sector, civil society, and policymakers. And all of this is only going to be possible if we have the data on hand to make well-informed decisions. So for these reasons, we truly believe in the importance of what WBA is trying to do here.
Great, thanks a lot. I think that's very, very helpful and insightful for us. And I see Zahid, you have your hand up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. I wanted to say, I think the third question that you raised is very helpful. I think what this can do, the benchmarking that you're doing is, it can raise issues like, what are the main gaps regarding access? What are the main gaps regarding skills? So that will be helpful, because when you say that these are the priorities, there are two different stakeholders, or actually three different stakeholders that could use this very well. The first in my mind is the companies, because you're basically telling the companies this is where you need to focus on in your global budgets, etc., or regional budgets need to focus on this area. Now, if they do that, then that means that the discussion they'll be having with government on the ground will be based on, this is what the WBA says, this was their result, this is where we're focusing. So that may pull in an interest from government at that time when you're doing benchmarking. So that's a second stakeholder who gets sort of pulled in a positive way to try and help with this. And it can drive direction, etc. And the third would be, I think, would be the development organizations, the DFIs, ADB, World Bank, etc., who look at this and say, right, what's our project in Pakistan or in Sri Lanka or in India, etc. Well, what are we doing there, and how do we fashion our digital spending or budgets or programs? So I think from those three perspectives, it can actually be very helpful to drive certain directions in that. The other thing I would say is that I really like the point that Hilani made regarding the pay stubs, for instance, and things of that nature. Now, it's difficult to sort of say that you need to get Uber to do engineering and pay those things, but the point is still valid, that what you need is a policy on the ground in, say, Sri Lanka or any other country where these kind of problems can be resolved. And so from that perspective, we always see CSR being pushed as spend your money to give people money, or spend your money to give people training. Why don't we say, well, spend your money to actually work with government in public-private partnership of policy development, encourage them to sit together to come up with policy changes, so that And rather than them seeing each other as, oh, let's sit together and try to coalesce on policy, this should be a CSR activity as well. That money should be spent in doing that to enable an investment-friendly environment to solve the problems of the government. So the government can say, look, we have this problem. You don't pay pay stubs. What can you guys do to fix this? Is there something in the policy within my country I can fix? What is it that I need to do so that your employees or people who are doing Uber can actually utilize this? And so working on that might also be a CSR project. So CSR shouldn't just be about brick and mortar training. CSR can also be about driving policy change. And I always remember this one thing: if you give somebody fish, they're done for a day. But if you give them a policy change in the way of in a means to be able to fish, then they'll continue to be able to have progress in the long run. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for those very, very specific comments, and the CSR idea is a very, very interesting one. Thanks for that as well. And I would like to now invite others to respond to this question. How can this benchmark help in driving digital inclusion and development? I don't see any hands up, but if anybody would like to just unmute and make a comment. Matt, do you have any messages from someone?
Yeah, perhaps I can jump in. No messages directly, but I liked how, Sahid, you spoke to the interactions there between the stakeholders groups. I think one of our roles as the World Benchmarking Alliance is also to kind of broker those conversations between critical actors. And I noticed you didn't draw upon civil society, and Helene, earlier you mentioned the role of civil society. So perhaps I can develop the question further and say, within the region, would anyone have specific examples or ideas on how the WBA could work with or empower or support civil society organizations to continue to feed into that interaction loop, which Sahid so simply and cleverly set out?
And maybe to add to Matt's talk, the digital sector is in a way a bit of a different challenge, because, for example, when you work in the food sector, for example, there's very strong civil society action across different issue topics. The digital sector is a bit more dispersed, and it's really, where is the civil society voice coming in? So if we can work together to identify where that is and how that can be brought in more civil society perspectives as well, that would actually be very welcome.
Good point. I see Helene, your hand up.
Thank you. I just wanted to make the quick point that I think government and private sector are talking to each other all the time. In fact, what you have now is incredibly tight connections between government and the digital private sector. It's, some in civil society call it an unholy alliance, but, well before internet shutdowns and, spying on people happened, government and civil society, governments and private sector talk to each other. The CEOs of telecom companies had audiences with the telecom minister at the push of a button. It's in fact the harder thing for the civil society to get in there. So what we need, if we want good policy making, and if we some kind of procedural legitimacy where the government has to bring in civil society into the picture. I will get shut down by civil society for saying this, but I also think civil society has then a role to go there as informed consumers. It's not enough to hold a placard and say, we want this. That's a kind of activism. I think that's fine, but we also need to, policy is about the art of the possible, and reform is an incremental process, we think, right? So everyone has to be willing to give. For example, if you think about issues of freedom of expression, privacy, content moderation, right? That's a classic case where civil society is quite active about the right to privacy and the right to freedom of expression. Government is very active and vocal about the need for security and national interest. Private sector is kind of in the middle. And if, somebody comes with a court order, which by the way, a government can just make up like that, they will shut down, they will filter or, do whatever, etc., or surveil. but they also now increasingly have a stakeholder in the form of civil society. So that kind of discussion, debate, and incremental improvements towards a better internet use is what we need. And it doesn't happen enough in that sort of multi-stakeholder manner. Again, a term that many people hate, but it really is important. Process does matter.
Thanks, Hilani. I see Zaid, your hand is up, but I would also like to invite someone who has not spoken so far, specifically on if there are good examples of such engagement happening. No, I see Esperanza, your hand up. If you could just unmute, and then Zaid, you can also come in after.
Thank you. I just want to address that question in terms of how the benchmark could help drive digital inclusion. And I think this is a very important point that we should keep in mind when using whatever benchmark, may it be the one from WBA or whatever international benchmarks there are in the international arena. Because I think previous speakers have also mentioned that some of these benchmarks are, used as sort of like a beauty contest, that they try to make themselves good, even though the services provided are not good. And so I think this issue about meaningful connectivity and how citizens are taking advantage of the benefits that the governments are giving, or the private sectors are giving in terms of the services that they are providing. I think this should be is the main focus of policies or anything that could be derived from benchmarking. So it should not be used as a single number or a single figure to just say we are doing good, but let that number be transformed into the ground, and let the impact be seen in terms of how people are really using and benefiting from ICTs. And I would say I always want to come back to this issue of unconnected population, and this is, I think, a huge concern that governments and companies should really pay attention to, because I think this is still a huge part of the population, and maybe this is the hardest part of the population that in terms of bringing them online, it will be harder than the other part of the population that's already online, because there's other issues that are not necessarily easily handled, such as, for example, the income levels, but that are not necessarily part of the ICT arena. And so it's important that working with private sectors and other government institutions in order to address other barriers to connectivity. Skills, of course, we mentioned them, but income is a big component. The people in rural areas, how they are situated, whether there's connectivity in those parts of the country. So the use of the benchmark and the policies that will come out from it. I don't know when WBA released these results, whether there will be any policy or company related recommendations that will be derived from the analysis of this benchmark. So I think this is very important to emphasize that this should not just stop as a number or a single figure, but derive policies out of them and make use of them for the benefits of everyone.
Thanks so much. Zahid, do you want to make your comment? And then Lodis, if you could also respond to some of these comments. I see you nodding, so I'm assuming you have a point to make on that.
And I think Miho wants to get in also. She just raised her hand. So I was just going to say that very quickly, that one of the ways, if businesses to try and get civil society on board with the regulators, that tends to be a challenge, because getting that together in a private conversation, maybe they're about licensee, licensor. But I do think that there's a way that you can actually encourage civil society, a government, to bring them to the table for policymaking, right? On access, on skills, on everything else. And you do that by basically saying, if you want development funding, right, then here are the certain things you need to do. And there should be sort of maybe a requirement to say, you need to hold multi-stakeholder policy rounds on at least 4 or 5 different vertical issues. And if you did that, you're linking money. So then it becomes a requirement, not at a low level. And this must be important. We don't want low-level policymakers to be there when civil society is at the table. We want high-level policymakers. And that should be one of the program milestones that then releases money. At least get them into the room together so they actually start listening and start learning how to talk to each other. Because in South Asian countries, Southeast Asian countries, sometimes it's a challenge to get them to start having a conversation with each other and get used to that culture of having that conversation. They just want to ignore, right?
Absolutely.
So the government just wants to ignore you. So I think making that, that carrot might help. And that was my one comment. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. And Miho from CRT.
Okay, thank you. I was just thinking about the relationship between the government and the company, and I just wanted to know the situation in your countries. For example, in Japan, the Japanese big ICT company and the Japanese government is a shareholder of biggest Japanese ICT company. So yeah, it may work positively sometimes and may work negatively sometimes. But how is the situation in your country? I was just wondered.
Okay. I think, that responding to that question will need much more time than what we have today. But maybe, if somebody would like to respond to that, that might be the last point for someone to make.
Yeah. Hello?
Yes.
Can I say one thing again on what I said earlier? And I said that to Zayed over the phone. See, first you set your ideals. In many technologies that the private sector over the years, and I'm a bit of an old timer, so I'm experienced in this a little bit, whether it's starting from as basic as railways, telephones, now you are in IT. What is your ideal? The ideal must be, I know it has been done before in the United States and other places, you have to first put your ideal on a piece of paper and take a consensus around the world of all the participants, because the governments, they have a role there, we cannot fight it, okay? But we must encapsulate this in a document. I don't know if there exists one internationally where you have 200 countries signing on to this. And again, it's in civil society again, it's individuals who are pioneers in this technology, because most of the international organizations are basically government representative. And I recently got for an organization a UN observer status, so I know what I went through to get it. I know that the United Nations, the ITU, they are there, but they're government representative, whether it be the telephony committee or this committee or that committee. You need, I told Zayed, I said, you put the server in Seychelles or someplace, put it on the moon, I'm sure you'll get somebody to take it and put it there. But it should just be a piece of document. It's just a document. I'm not saying you make a security, it's a virtual world charter. Right. I think you get a consensus in the virtual world charter, but I'm not an expert in this area, mind you, that's Zayed's area and you with people. But I tell you from my experience in dealing with governments all around the world, and I do cross-border work,
sure.
It's the only way, because at least you encapsulate what you want. And the funny part about it is everybody's going to sign on because everybody loves their freedom, and the virtual world is free. And and at least you should encapsulate your charter. I'm not saying the content issue. I'm not going there. Your basic principles. I think that this should be defined. It will make the job easier for us because at least it's a reference document. It's even a gauging document of societal freedoms. Yeah, it's up to you. This is my suggestion to you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. And I think, Hilani, you have a question for WB, and then I would like to hand over to Lourdes to respond to some of the comments.
Yes, I was just asking, how do you reconcile in your practical evaluation of companies? You in the end need to put them into 1, 2, or 3 under each of these indicators. A company that behaves in a particular way, let's say in the EU, given GDPR rules and, sort of strict code of, sort of values embodied in that, etc., etc. Let's say take data sharing or, whatever. And in a completely different way in take Myanmar, where the government calls you for a meeting and asks you to track a user X. This is the same company behaving very differently. And we've got a million examples of this, right? How do you then reconcile this in where the company ranks in any one of these sub-dimensions? Thank you.
Thanks, Hilani. And I think with that easy question, I would hand over to Lotus to try and respond to that. But thank you everyone for all the comments and making the conversation interactive. Lotus, over to you.
That is actually an excellent excellent question, because as we've seen in the map, these companies are global and have subsidiaries all over the world and operate in multiple jurisdictions. It's very rare to see a company in the list who is only operating in one country. At the moment, for this first iteration, as you know, you always balance the aspiration, the ambition with reality. So it's cutting the clothes to fit the cloth in a way. So for the first iteration, what we are doing is we are looking at the global level impact. So we measure on group level. So we look at the group level. It's not on specific subsidiaries, but it's actions and policies taken at the group level. So we do recognize that is a challenge given the multiple jurisdictions that companies are actually working in. That's a start. It's not perfect in any way. The hope is that if anything is taken at the group level, then it should be, and civil society, and this is where civil society's role comes in. Civil society can hold companies to account and say, look, you have this things going on at the group level. How well is this respected in your subsidiary operations? And we can and then we can start talking about the disconnect. So that's actually a brilliant question. Thank you, Hilani. And on that note, there were very many points raised. I cannot definitely answer them individually in the time that we have left, but I would just like to reiterate that we are very happy to be in touch with all of you individually. Let's touch base, have a call, discuss. As we said, the benchmark is a living thing. It's not, it's not dead. It doesn't stay the same. It grows every year. It changes. It evolves to address the pressing issues that we see for our time. So we invite everyone to be closely involved in this process from a multi-stakeholder perspective. Civil society, especially, to understand what are the needs on the ground. Companies to understand what they are actually also already doing. Governments to understand where the gaps are and where things need to move forward as well. And of course, researchers and academics have we should never ever forget the role of researchers and academics in helping to build narratives, in shaping the terms of the debate. So once again, we invite everyone to join us basically on this journey. It is a journey after all. Many of the organizations here are actually on board already formally as our allies. We have Miho from Co-Roundtable Japan has been working closely with the World Benchmarking Alliance. We have NASCOM Foundation, I see that, joined us after the Mumbai Roundtable. And of course, we have the International Chamber of Commerce, where on July 15, we're having a joint session, SDG Action Labs for the digital sector. So there are already many groups and organizations in this space who has joined us on this journey together on incentivizing corporate action for SDGs. And we invite you all to please also join us. It's really just about shared goals, which is SDGs, and how we can work together. It's nothing formal. It's not a membership thing. It's really just helping each other, co-curating collaboration possibilities as well. So please let us know, and we're happy to be in touch. Allies come in all shapes and sizes. In general, they are not companies, although there are financial organizations, the banks and investors are formally still part of the alliance because of the dual nature of their role. They play a very important role in driving the financing and in driving corporate action, both in the digital sector and out. However, there are all sorts of organizations, especially civil society is very well represented. So we do invite everyone. And we would like to actually stay in touch as we develop the benchmark further. So we come out with the first results in November. Then we look at where we can even make it stronger so that we can address many of the things that were discussed here, which were really very good points. And we're making progress. We're really making progress in the sense that when we think about digital inclusion, it's no longer just very narrow thing. Now we understand that it's really leaving no one behind in the digital economy. They have to innovate. They have to have no barriers to use. They have to have the skills aside from just having access. So that's a great thing. Just even broadening the terms of the discussion is already quite useful. And of course, we need your help so that this becomes something that really helps everyone in their work to drive digital inclusion. So with that, I would actually end, I would say, with a call to action. I'm very happy. This has been a very, very dynamic, discussion. I think we're getting used to Zoom by now. So I hope before we close up, another point maybe that might be of interest to you. The WBA has actually done a lot of research and identified 2,000 companies all over the world, what we call the SDG 2000. These are the 2,000 companies across the 7 system transformations that I just mentioned, who are influential towards achieving SDGs. And we want to hold them to account, encourage a race to the top. Yet at the base, the foundation of it is a lot of things that they are doing that affect our social and economic well-being. And therefore, all the 2,000 companies will be assessed. There's a coming benchmark and indicators on labor rights, human rights, taxation, corruption, lobbying, all those very, very basic things, which Jose Albert from PIDS mentioned privately to me. I'll bring it out in public. It's a very good point. And digital companies will also be assessed on that. And therefore, we can see sort of the disconnect between what they say they are doing here and what they are doing at a more basic level to really get that back down to the basics as well. So that's coming out. That's also coming out soon. So again, we reiterate the invitation. Always, we are available. Feel free to get in touch, and we consider everyone in this conversation now are new friends in a way in this journey together. And let's begin at the beginning, as they say. So this is the first round, and we improve it as we go along. And with that, I would like to close and hope that we can perhaps take a group picture as usual, and maybe with some photos, if those who don't mind having their faces in there. Start with a smile. I can see that Jeff is already smiling. He's already ready for his his group photo. Matt, can you take our group photo, please?
Yes, I will do. Give me 2 seconds.
Brilliant.
Okay, 3, 2, 1. And 3, 2, 1. Great. Thank you, everyone.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone.
Have a
Thank
great
you,
day.
guys. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.